snows that tells me secrets about the end, how not to fear it, and how to be on inside my head. Know with me when I'm saying
Hello, welcome to Beastly Theories. I'm your host, Th.D. McGrath. Today we have Dennis Swift. Now, Dennis pastors the Church of All Nations in Portland, Oregon, and regularly guides group tours of South American archaeological sites. He's received his BA and Masters of Divinity from Point Loma Nazarene University and his doctorate from the University of South Africa. He pursued Indian studies at the University of New Mexico and Western New Mexico University. Dennis has pursued archaeological work in Peru, Bolivia, Mexico, Cambodia, Turkmenistan, Israel, and the American Southwest, and has traveled extensively in Peru. In particular, his investigation of the Ica Stones has intrigued me for some time. It's a real pleasure to welcome him to the show. Dennis, how are you?
Well, I'm doing very well, thank you.
That's
It's a joy to be with you.
Well, thank you. It's a joy for me as well. Now, one of your books that really intrigued me, and I've been aware of your work for a while, and I started following Don Patton some time ago, and I became aware of you through some of his talks and your expeditions together. And one of your very interesting books is called The Secrets of the Ica Stones and Nazca Lines, in brackets, Proof that Dinosaurs and Man Lived Together. So let's talk about proof of man and dinosaur coexisting. What type of evidence is there to show us that man and dinosaur coexist or coexisted?
Well, some of the evidence is petroglyphs, rock art carvings, and pictographs, rock art paintings. And there's at least 10 of those in different places. One of them in South America, in the Amazon. There's about 4 of them in Utah. There's one in Colorado and a few other locations. So you have an Apatosaurus or Camosaurus. You have a pterosaur, and you have a duck-billed dinosaur, and something that looks like an iguanodon. So those are some of the things that are on petroglyphs. As far as pieces of pottery and fabrics, there's about 40 pieces of pottery and fabrics from the tombs in Peru, and they are amazingly anatomically correct, and they predate some of the modern understanding of dinosaurs. So I had to see them up close, where they did the dermal spines. They have the patterns. In fact, in the second book I'm writing, a Triceratops didn't have 3 horns. It had 5 horns, Cincoceratops. There's only 2 of the horns that are on the side that have been found. They all broke off the crest, but the best preserved one is in the Smithsonian. And a guy at the Smithsonian had read my book and in charge of collections of fossils, and he sent me some information. So also the skin pattern on the back of a Triceratops, and it had a little dermal ridge in the back. The Lane Triceratops in 2001 is the best preserved piece of Triceratops skin. It's about the size of a tabletop, and we can see the large, and about that size.
Kind of like a spherical?
Yeah, spherical. They don't connect. Dinosaur skin was different from reptile skin, and it didn't overlap like scales on the reptile did, like a snake. They're more like the cassowary bird. And I'm not saying they're related to birds. I'm just saying it looks that kind of a pattern, as I believe is a common designer, that God uses similar things. Also, let's see, we got petroglyphs, pictographs, a number of fabrics. The Paracas people, for instance, from 400 to 600 BC to about 200 AD. They were the most exquisite workers in textiles, tightly woven, up to 690 threads per linear inch. And
what continent was that on?
The Paracas people are from Peru on the coast. They're the coneheads. And I did the first DNA ever. And they are not Nephilim, some kind of hybrids of angels having cavorting sexually with women, and they're not aliens. They are definitely distinctively, their DNA goes back to the Middle East, and Liberty University did the samples. And so this was written up in a little journal article a couple of years ago. And so further research, more information is going. And they built their homes in the sand dunes underground. And they might have cooked on the top with fires, but they lived in the sand. So they're quite a curious group of people. And because the Atacama Desert is the driest place on the planet, almost no measurable moisture, there's people who have lived there who have never seen rain. And so once it was buried in the tomb, and they do the sides with a certain type bricks and then the Harengo woods at the top, then it's buried, it's sealed, and it stays incredibly preserved. In fact, it looks like somebody's been dead a couple of years, not 2,000 years or so.
So these are the mummies that we see sometimes that have been completely preserved in the dry desert sands?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So I had one of the best preserved skulls. I'm also trying to work with some people to get a really one that's well preserved with skin, to show that that none of them that we've ever found of the Paracas people are over 5'2" and a half. They were slightly larger than the other people. The Incas, the Nazcans, all of them were very small people. In fact, I have what is called a Chasqui, the Inca runners. They had a network of over 2,800 miles from up near Ecuador all the way down to Argentina, below almost the end of Argentina. And they could do it within about 12 days, 10, 12 days. Chasquis were the runners. They had the talking knots. I have the quipus. I have some of those with the talking knots. And I have one of the canteens, which is about the size of a dinner plate. And on it are two dinosaurs. And I have a Tiwanaku canteen that has two Stegosaurus dinosaurs on the top. So this has been authenticated with thermoluminescent dating too. It dates to about 800 years ago. So I have a number of these items.
What's the advantage of, sorry to interrupt you, but what's the advantage of thermoluminescent dating over 14 or something like that?
It shows that they're not recently manufactured. In other words, when they do the bombardment, it can tell with the gases and stuff that burn off within 150 to 200 years of how old they are. It's not absolute, but can certainly outroll fakes. So I did about 14 of them, 12, 14 of them, of different pieces I have to authenticate them, because I'm trying to finish another book. And some of them are quite astonishing. I happen to have them in my house, in fact. So these pieces of evidence are very hard to overcome. And the best of the Ica Stones, there's plenty of fakes, Ica Stones, but also when there's something, even though it's very dry, a little bit of patina will cover it. Modern pieces that people try to carve, they use like hacksaw blades or other metals, and you will see the tiny residue under a microscope. And you find the evidence also because it's the feldspar. The andesite stones, some of them are very hard, but if you break the surface, there's little bits of quartz and feldspar, and it'll glint back to you, and you can see it. But if it's old, I have some that are old that they're covered with patina, and you don't have that. Also, the fakes.
I guess it's probably quite easy to authenticate the Ica Stones or other ancient stones in that case in carvings, because without the patina, you don't have the age.
It is also stuff that's right out of the tomb. They're not contaminated by the modern environment. Modern environment, regardless, you will have a little bit of plastic or cloth, and people who try to use fillers on the stones, when they do that, they leave a little bit of tiny bit of plastic, or there's a tiny bit of hair or a piece of cloth, embedded. You always find that. And so when you do a test, like I did it at Chem Labs in Westland, Oregon, and they can tell exactly. You can see it under the microscope. I also did an experiment where I had a fake stone carved by a guy named Basilio Uchua, who was supposed to be the guy who carved all these. But his stone, in fact, I have one right here, a stone. It's, you can tell the sharp grooves. You can see it's recently carved. And then what they did is a kind of a shoe polish. Whereas a real one will have stuff inside of it, like this has two dinosaurs. And then also it has a little bit of covering of patina. And this is tar from a tar pit. And Th.D. was a skeptic and archaeologist, and him and another guy made a video, and he scraped one of the stones, but then the little pieces of wood in it, it dated like something 1,500 years old. So, and this is the best one. It's got two dinosaurs on it, and you can see it's covered with patina.
I can't see actually, Dennis, because you don't have your camera.
Oh yeah. Sorry, I forgot.
No, sorry.
But I have a poster and stuff. I'm forgetting that you don't have the camera.
No, but I'll pop some pictures up with the interview as well to show them some of the things we're talking about.
I brought in some stones and things, but so these are all things that mitigate against it being fakes. Also on the stones are dermal spines that I mentioned. Dermal spines.
Now, what is the situation with that? So you mentioned that the dermal, the spines, the frills.
Spines on the back. If you look at all textbooks, even till about 2000, they started changing. There's a guy named Steven Zerkis who lived in Utah, and he was at the fossils in Wyoming, and he found the evidence. It shows that the back of dinosaurs, they weren't smooth like elephants, smooth and wrinkly some, but they had like scoots or different triangular shaped, small, similar to an alligator or a crocodile. And so some of them had larger ones, but now we know that they look like that. Also, some of the best preserved fossil skins show that they had patterns, like Rosetta patterns in skin and stuff. So the Ica Stones have it correctly portrayed. And they also have, where if you go back 70s and 80s even, early 90s, they would depict the dinosaurs with their tails dragging. Now we know that even the sauropods, the larger ones, like Diplodocus, walked with their tails straight out. And so the Ica Stones have stones with the dinosaurs walking. It shows that their tail is straight out when they're walking.
And when were they found, the Ica Stones? Because I'm assuming, since we've only just found this out about dinosaurs.
Very interesting. And I have to go into the archives of my mind. The first mention is around 1535.
Oh, okay. So a little while before we knew about dinosaurs.
It's associated, although they don't come all from the Ica Indians. The modern town is called Ica, but there were a group of Indians there called the Ica Indians, ICA. And Father Simeon was traveling with Pizarro, the conqueror of the Incas, and he came to this place where the Ica Indians lived, and he's the first one that documented the Ica Stones. And then there was another guy who was a chronicler, which I don't pronounce names right, but it's Juan de Patacute. He was an Indian, and also his father was Spanish, his mother was an Indian, and he was a chronicler. And he also mentions the strange engraved stones of Ica. Now, in 2002, I was doing a thing with people who were filming for National Geographic. The one thing is the Nazca lines, where there's the big geoglyphs, all different kinds of designs, and long lines. Because it doesn't rain, they're still there, done by the Nazcan people from about 300 BC to 8 or 900 AD. And we've documented that there are three places there where they did dinosaurs. There is one on Palpa, which the people don't really fly over. I spotted it a few years ago. Another guy, Eduardo Haran, was a pilot who took me over this place. And there is a similar to a Striarchosaurus. It's about 50 meters long, and it doesn't look exactly like a Striarchosaurus, but it's similar. You can tell it's a dinosaur with a frill in the back. So, and
that's fascinating.
yeah, and a number of cloths and pieces of pottery that the Nazcans made that have dinosaurs on them. And they're very, 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 very wealthy people who collect this stuff. Fortunately, there's some people who helped me and let me have some of the items. Technically, but nobody believes it would be real anyway, because they have dinosaurs on them, the fab and the vases and stuff. So,
but I'm assuming that they believe everything else found from that culture is.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
that's a regular
and
feature.
Also, an absolute idiot would think that they could manufacture modern pottery and look like the ancient. No, it's not the same firing process. They used a very hard word called arango. They also used different mixtures of minerals and things. We can't get the same color combination. The same. Also, in regards to that, when something is really old, you know it's old. You can see different features of it. If something's made, 20 years ago or something, you can tell it easily. It's a modern piece of pottery. Also, the people who do pottery down there, we tested this, and they'll tell you they cannot make it the way those people did, as thin around the sides and stuff. They just don't have any process. They've tried. So if you buy a piece of pottery from them, it's thicker and it's bright colored, and where the old ones, also many of them, because they're very old, they'll have a little chunk out of the bottom, just a little round circle. And what happens is over time, there's a weak spot in the pottery. It causes that to happen. And of course, if you have something 1,500 years in a tomb, even, it's going to show the effects.
I think that's reasonable wear and tear. I don't think I have any pots here in the house that will last that long, that's for sure. Now, talking about the Ica Stones, and let's talk about what's on them. So there are pictures of dinosaurs on them, showing things like scoots, back frills, and something we didn't know about till recently, showing spiracles and the different type of skin they had. Again, we didn't know that until recently when we found examples of fossilized dinosaur skin.
Also, in many of them, like this stone I have that's well preserved, it has a lot of patina on them. In 2001, there was a guy named Lawrence Whitmar who did extensive study of dinosaur skulls, and dinosaurs had their nostrils at the very front. That's important because other people believed that they were semi-aquatic until they put the nostrils a little bit up further. The things like the stones I have, the nostrils are in the correct place. See,
so
if you're not
at the front in the stones that you have?
Yeah, the nostrils are in the correct place.
Which is the front.
It's not me saying that. It's also the guys who worked at the Smithsonian and things. They pointed it out when they sent me the information. Of course, they don't come out in the open because it's a career-threatening injury. If you vouch and show that something a creationist has is authentic.
Well, yeah, I suppose that would be the death knell to a lot of careers out there. And with that kind of motivation, I suppose you can't really blame individuals for being discreet. Now, talking about the types of dinosaurs on the stones, you've obviously seen a lot of these stones. You've got to witness them. What types of?
I'm probably the only person that exists, except maybe one other guy, This is about 2003. We took pictures of every stone there.
Wow.
And now it's a hostile environment. They won't let people take pictures. They don't want creationists in there. The son of Javier Cabrera, they believe other things. They believe the alien theories and stuff. But definitely you have the correction, as I said, the dermal spines. You have about 4 different types of patterns of skin that has been proved correctly. You also have on some of the stones the correct placement of the legs. They're not splayed out. Some people thought they were so heavy they would be more like an alligator or something. Their legs out like this. They're up. They're different. Of course, there's varying degrees of artistic ability, where some stones are very, very incredible. Other stones are primitive, but they're depicting dinosaurs. Also, there is this fact that Certo, Alexander Honto Certo, he was the number 2 Peruvian archaeologist. He died about maybe 10 years ago. He was so famous. And in an independent excavation out at Ocahahe near Ica, he found some engraved stones. And a guy named Dave Watzel, who does cryptozoology, some of it, we did an article, and it was very difficult because even creationists, while they say they believe, they don't believe. It's amazing how much believing believers or unbelievers.
Sure. What do you mean by when they say they believe, even when they say they believe, they don't? That you're saying that faced with the evidence,
well, they have
to
problems
accept?
that certainly, if that would be the case, they would have it, or they would know about it.
Okay.
There's where I'm a supernaturalist in the sense it is a series of things that I never set out to do that happened. For instance, in 1979, I went with my father to Chaco Canyon, and I picked up a book. I was at the time a theistic evolutionist, but I picked up a book by Franz Barn, and in the back were unexplained petroglyphs. And I contacted him, and he'd never seen them. So that sent me, when I heard of creationists in 1985, and I heard this, then I trigged about the book. I went searching for these petroglyphs in Utah, and then by chance, I also went and found another one of a triceratops that's authentic. Only a handful of people have seen it, but it is also Anastasi's. It's about 300 BC, 1200 AD period of time. You can't date it precisely, but something's not recent because when they do these things, there's a pitting and grooving, and if you did it on a fresh thing, you could tell it. I mean, you just once you break the surface, it's very bright.
Oh yes,
so
I understand.
That's me off, and then other things happened, and then in the early 90s, I went to Peru. I was robbed. I went to see the Ica Stones, and I was robbed. But I believe in the supernatural. So out of that, I was delayed, and some other things happened. I went to Nazca, and I happened to run into somebody selling some stuff out at the airport, a few antiquities. So I asked them if they had others, and they took me and his mother. They were grave robbers. And as I was looking through all the fabrics, there was a piece of fabric that was Nazcan, very deteriorated, but it had dinosaurs on it.
Wow.
So one thing led to another. Like I'm a pastor, and it's not a question of bias. Is what are the best bias to be biased with? You can't bypass your bias. So I'm going to have a bias, but evidence is either going to come or is either going to be there or not. And so out of that whole thing, this family, because I know other pastors, grave robbers know other grave robbers. And so through time and through the network, when they find something that's like that and unexplained, of course, there's a few times where there's guys who have many millions of dollars. They get something before I ever get it, so they have it in their private collections. Um, but I have, like I said, about 40 items now,
That's
and
a
I'm
lot.
trying. What?
That's a lot.
It's something.
I mean, that's a lot of items. That's a great collection.
My house is kind of like a museum in a way. And so I'm trying to document all these things. Every time an old person dies, it's like a library burning down.
No, I understand that actually, and I believe the
point.
same thing, which is why it's so
And
important to
people
record
have
these things.
information, and so I'm trying to finish these other two books, and it's slow, and plus you have to do all the things that answers the critics ahead of time with testing and stuff. So that's being compiled and seeing what's going to happen. And hopefully, that if there would be any place where something could be preserved as a mummy, could be Peru in the Atacama Desert, or down in Chile or Argentina where the desert is. Maybe somebody buried a little dinosaur mummy. That would be fantastic, wouldn't it?
That would be amazing, actually. Now, talking about stuff like that, you said that you were robbed in Peru.
Yeah.
Have there been other moments when the locals or wildlife in the locations you've gone to have been a danger to you? What kind of experiences have you had on expedition?
Well, here we are we live in this world where we think only what we see exists. But in Peru and some Bolivian places like that, there's shamans. And people not believe that there are demons. But they exist. So what they do, they know when there's a disturbance around them. Like the demons will come back and tell them certain things. So to not think that you won't be targeted, you can't be targeted. I mean, just a few times are just bizarre things. One time I was with my wife, and all of a sudden in this one area, a guy comes right over into our lane, and he's driving right in towards us. I try to go to the right, and he's coming straight at us, and he's laughing.
Wow.
And then a few years ago, in the same area, the same spot, within a quarter of a mile, we were hit by a vehicle.
Wow.
A guy in a sports car hit the side of the van and bounced off and went in between a telephone pole and his house. So, there's many other things that have happened that are just, you start thinking, people don't believe there's another dimension. But when you deal with these people, even if you've ever watched River Monsters, you ever watch that guy?
Yes, of course.
He's had a couple of encounters where they went to the witch doctor and stuff.
Yes.
And all of a sudden, things begin to happen.
Yes.
This is another thing that people probably...
It surprised me when he did that, actually, because he's always coming from a very scientific point of view in his shows, and then he seemed invested in it, at least, or at least he may be paying.
Mongolia, the woman changes and she speaks as a man. I mean, completely different voice. I mean, it's like bizarre. Her eyes changes, and all these other things begin to happen. So people don't think there's another dimension, but there is.
Well, and often when they do, they've got very different ideas about it. I often when I'm talking to people that follow my work, the few people that follow my investigations, I often say to them, look, when I'm writing this, I know that my belief set, what I believe in is Christianity. That's, I know I believe it truly, but I accept from your point of view, it's my worldview. And it's practically impossible, even though I'm not writing about Christianity here, but about cryptozoology, it's impossible to not be subjective to that worldview because, of course, it will dominate everything I investigate. I try to be as unbiased as I can, but I accept that it's an impossibility. And I just give that to them up front. This is where I'm coming from. So it's going to have a hand in it. If you don't like it, well, that's a shame. But we've all got different ideas on things, and different levels to which we believe them. Now, my wife is Jewish. She's from the land of Israel, and we have children and various people in my family have different beliefs again. So having that kind of family experience allows you to tap into the fact of, okay, people are going to think differently to you, so you might as well just stick to your guns, and they accept it or they don't. That's kind of where we come from. But I know from your point of view, people like yourself and Dr. Patton, obviously this is your mission statement, is to prove the truth of the Bible and creation through finding these evidences, which I don't think is a problem, really. I don't doubt that there's some reality to these Ica Stones, and I've been fascinated by them for such a long time. Even when you look at the time that they were discovered, that's before we knew about the, as you say, the spiracles and the dermal ridges and the spines and things like that. So, that's an insight, really, that he couldn't have known about even if he faked them, right?
Right. And one stone I know some people that are grave robbers, and down in Nazca, and the son, they were digging in a place near the Rio Grande, which is just a little tiny stream and they were by there was the ancient irrigation fields and stuff where they grew some crops a few miles from Nazca, and they were they're looting a grave, and they take a stone, and I have that stone now, but it was getting toward dusk. They couldn't see there was an image on it. They just turned it over, and a couple of them, they got a marker, and they were going to play tic-tac-toe. But when they looked at it, they could see there was engravings on it. So there's two dinosaurs in that stone, and they've been authenticated and stuff. Giuseppe Raffica, who's the Italian, who's doing the archaeological work at Cotahuasi, they're pyramids, gigantic pyramids, almost the size of the Giza pyramids. They're made out of clay, but they're buried. And it's in the desert by Nazca, and they have figures around them too. So they're excavating some of them, part of it. But this has been authenticated too. And this stone I have with these two dinosaurs. And there's also an engraved stone at the Nazca Museum that they found. That has a mountain lion and some other animals on it, not a dinosaur. But in 2001, I was filming with National Geographic, and we were digging, the grave robbers were digging at Inca Chicha, the Inca Chicha people. And when they opened up one tomb, there was an engraved stone.
Wow.
It didn't have dinosaurs on it, but it's engraved. It proves the point. The Aeronautical Museum for the air and space is in the Las Palmas Air Force Base in Lima, and they have a museum there. And there's an engraved stone in the case. But there used to be 51 stones, and some of them had dinosaurs on them. But when I got rooting around and got in there about 2004, and we took pictures and things, then the stones disappeared. They got rid of them by letting different guys on the base take them home, different soldiers or colonels or whatever, and they got rid of them because it's so controversial and so problematic for them.
When it comes to that kind of problematic situation, have you experienced elements of cover-ups or stonewalling when you've been trying to get access to things that have existed?
Yes, for instance, there's the Ica Regional Museum, and they used to have maybe 300 stones, and during the 60s when Javier Cabrera started working, some of the stones came from actual excavations. A few of them were from the Soldi brothers, Carlos and his brother Pablo Soldi in Oklahoma. They were fairly well-to-do. You know, they were raised grapes and made wine, and they also dug some tombs on the side. And those stones were in the Ica Region Museum. Part of them Dr. Cabrera got. See, so people say, oh, these are all fake, but he got from the Ica Museum. And there's 121 of those stones left in the Ica Regional Museum.
Wow.
So they denied it. They said, we don't have anything like that. And while they were denying it, they said, no, that Certo never wrote a book. He never said anything about that. So I was talking to the director, and I reached up to the bookshelf above his head, and I said, is this the book you don't have? But they refused to let me see the stones and photograph them. So I had to go to the Ica main headquarters that was above the museum, and they granted me to do that. So I saw maybe 60 of them or so and photographed them. They wouldn't let me do everything. They wanted me out of there. But there's one with something that looks like a pterosaur.
Wow.
One of the stones.
Yeah.
And others, they're some of the different style than all of them that are at Cabrera's museum. But there's also what's called blanco, just the plain stone carved. Mm-hmm. And others have tar on it to lighten it. Some are in bas relief with a figure. The one stone I have here is bas relief where it's just a slightly raised. So see it. And many of these things just show that this is evidence that certainly is hard to overcome.
I mean, it is really fascinating, and as I said before, it really has grabbed my interest for such a long time. You know, I've been intrigued by it because there's so many elements of it that, because of the time when they were discovered, would be difficult to fake. So, you know, it does seem to pass the test there. Now, I know they're not alone, these Ica stones. There's something called the Acambaro figures as well. Now, where do they come from? And what part did you have in discovering?
I have some of those here at my house too. Acambaro is about 180 miles north of Mexico. It is now a town maybe 60,000 people. There was a guy who was a Waldemar Julsrud. He was a German guy, married a Spanish woman. He fought in World War I. He ran a hardware store in Acambaro. And he was out riding a horse on El Toro Mountain, the Bull Mountain, and he saw a piece of pottery. And he got down and he picked it up. And after that, he hired some guys to start digging. And the more they dug and stuff, they found more and more pieces. And he paid some people a little bit of money, but it would be like, 10 cents, something like that. You couldn't even make it, probably couldn't make it for 10 cents. It'd be ridiculous. And in the process of that, he found there was a combination of about 33,000 pieces.
Wow.
And they're cataloged. He had a mansion connected to the hardware store. It took over everything. In fact, even his bathtub was filled with them. Every room was filled with incredible amount of stuff. And I have talked with people who went with him and his grandson one time, who's probably close to 70 years old now.
Wow.
And he can remember as a kid going and they would dig and they would find it. I talked to a lawyer. I'm sure he's now deceased, but in the process of things, near Acambaro was a place where they were digging, and he found some intertwined in the Macara root. There was newspaper reporter, Los Angeles Times,
Mm-hmm.
1956, Lowell Hammer, and he went to Acambaro and had the same experience. And he found some things, and he filmed it on an old 8mm camera. And also, there was about 5 articles written in the 50s. I have copies of this from Fate magazine, which is actually a kind of a offbeat, all kinds of things.
I know Fate magazine.
By
Yeah.
the Acambaro. So then, I had read about this as best I can remember when I was a kid. And after I met Don Patton, Don wanted to contact me, and he never knew anything about this stuff, the actual evidence. And so that was in 1996. And so he said, but then I took him to Utah, to the bridge, Kachina Bridge in the national park there. That wasn't even explored till 1961, that place. But it's a canyon area. And then we went to, I told him about Peru. He went to Peru with me, Paracas, to look at the possibility of a human fossilized skull next to a fossilized extinct turtle. And then I told him about Acambaro. So we went to Acambaro 3 times. The first time we went there, of course, they deny. We went to the city government. Oh, we don't have anything like that. We don't know what you're talking about. So I give them the evidence. And over time, they allowed us they were stored away in some building in these old crumbling cardboard boxes. And we took out, and we probably took pictures of a few hundred of them. And then because of the uproar, we went to the officials, and the guy who later became the governor of, the president of Mexico, Vicente Fox. He was the governor of that state. And then we went to the main headquarters, and we talked to them, and one thing led to another, and they were going to build a little museum in Acambaro. So then out of that, because we stirred up so much anxiety deaths, they they photographed what was remaining, which was about 20,000 of them. Also, during the doing of this, they also stole them, the officials, some of the best pieces. Wow. But there is a museum now there, but everything is boxed up except, maybe a couple of hundred items maximum of different things that give the history. They also put it in an area of town where people don't go. See, we're going to have it in the main plaza.
Yeah.
A lot of attention. So yes,
what kind of
I have about eight of those.
You have 8 of those. And what type of dinosaurs do you have from that collection? What can you make
I
out?
have an iguanodon that was, as you know, that was all wrongly until the 90s.
Yes.
They had it standing up, or they had different features. The Acambaro figures are correct. And so I have some different Diplodocus dinosaurs. I even have one with a little guy who's on top of it. And this is where you run into trouble, because thermoluminescent testing, they don't want to handle things. Mm-hmm. If they do, they'll try to give you a false date. They'll take something else because it's just too much for them.
Oh, I see.
So, thermoluminescent laboratories authenticating pieces. But I do have quite a few that have been.
So I guess if they authenticated it, the laboratory would also probably take some heat for that.
At first. And then one day when I went to this one laboratory in Littleton, Colorado, and they cost about $250 to $300 a piece to authenticate, it becomes very, very problematic because if, and I said a little too much, but I was there for all day, and we're giving them pieces, and they drill with a little tiny drill and take out the contents. That became a problem because on pieces, some of them they would give different dates,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
but a number of them were completely authenticated. They
Wow.
couldn't get around it.
I mean, essentially, from your opinion, Dennis, considering the time period in which they were discovered and the knowledge that we now have like about things like the iguanodon that you have,
Yeah.
would it be really impossible for people who'd never seen these creatures to make that depiction so accurately in a way that we've just found out about? I mean, surely that's apart from the authentication, that's the strongest plus, isn't it, for them being authentic? That we couldn't
Well,
have had that knowledge before.
there's quite a few items at an American university. I won't name because I want to go and take out the collection myself. But they tried to make it that it was from the comic books and stuff from the 40s and 50s. Well, that's incorrect because they're not depicted like the dinosaurs in the comic books. In fact, either that or poor campesinos, Mexican people, are better paleontologists than the paleontologists.
Yes. Which is a bit of a stretch, really,
Yeah,
isn't it?
right. So they got the iguanodon right, and it took you 40-something years. I have one piece that's from Tiwanaku, not Tiwanaku. It's a canteen with two stegosauruses on it. So it's not from Acambaro, but it has two stegosauruses, and it has the plates and a very distinctive kind of alignment. Because there's three different theories about how the plates go in stegosaurus bags. Because every stegosaurus that ever been found, the plates are not there; they're nearby,
Sure. Yeah.
so they don't know how they exactly. But these guys, somebody's seeing a living one, they knew how to put it on there, and it's authenticated. So,
Wow.
Acámbaro is quite a mystery. In fact, the mayors, some of these names used to readily come to mind, but this is in the 90s. There's Japanese who came and filmed, and they did a program in Japan, and I have an old VHS from that, but they looted part of the collection too. Wow. In fact, there is a dinosaur that's from Argentina that has a really strange frill on the back, and there's that identical dinosaur is in the Acambaro collection. But
yes, I seem to remember seeing that picture, and it also has a small horn on the front of the nose. Is that right?
This has kind of a sail. It's it looks like a big frill on the back.
Yeah, like a big frill. No, I think I know the one you mean.
And so then, in top of that, the mayor at the time, he looted probably a few hundred of them, some of the best pieces of the dinosaurs. But even saying that, when they took the pictures, I have the entire the pictures that were done professionally in about 2000. I have all those on 2 different discs, so I have the entire collection on disc.
Amazing. I mean, it really is a privilege, and obviously you put yourself out there, and you found these things. You've struggled to bring them to attention. I think that's fantastic. Now, what I'd like to know, maybe the listeners might like to find out, is how do you plan your expeditions? As a religious person, do you feel like you're called to something, or do you feel that the call from God essentially is you go out and you put yourself into something that's worthwhile and purposeful? How do you decide what you're going to investigate next?
This is for instance, Tiger Woods, when he was at the top of his golf game, he was sponsored by Nike and by the Titleist Golf, and LeBron James, the basketball player, is sponsored by the Los Angeles Lakers and Spalding Basketball. Dale Earnhardt was sponsored by Fram and Texaco. Well, I'm sponsored by the Living God. And so the question is, he, in a way, orders steps. Then you don't face the future like your head forward. It's like your hand is behind you, and he sees the future, and you put your hand in his hand. And then when you look back as you walk, that's the Hebrew understanding of future. And you see it unfolding. So I couldn't have orchestrated these things. You know, from the day I went, my dad got that book. Having a creation speaker come to the church, a guy named Don Chittick, which I was reluctant at the time to let him speak because I thought it would cause division. It didn't. There's always an organized blood clot. There's always somebody disagrees. But in the middle of all that, just one thing after another led to these things. So,
I mean, it's interesting to me that sorry to cut across you there, but it's interesting to me how each individual person comes onto their journey. So for me, for example, I became a Christian when I was 16 in the Baptist church, and Ron Wyatt came to our church in Wales, England, and gave a speech on cryptozoology. And or creationism as he called it then, but essentially it was things about Nessie and the Zeomaro carcass and all these different other things, and that kind of switched me onto it then. And I was still, like yourself at that point, a theistic evolutionist for a long time, because of course science proved it. So why should I disagree with that? And I found all the normal mental twists and turns that one would take to infer that God created the world through evolutionary processes, until I found out about correlation, fossil dating and correlation. And once I found out that, I mean, I know it's not as simple as this, but once I found out that the simple principle was essentially, you use the rock layers to date how old the fossils are, or the fossils to date how old the rock layers are, and then that same rock layer to date that fossil, and they don't come from the same place. They don't exist in any one order anywhere. As soon as I found that out, I was like, well, this is insane. This isn't scientific. What have I been listening to all these years? This doesn't seem to make any sense. I know a lot of materialists or scientific friends would take umbrage over that, but that is the basic principle of fossil dating. So, essentially, we can't prove anything as any age, in that sense. And it just seemed to be a fallacy to me. And then I started looking, and I found a few talks by Don Patton and a few talks by Ken Hovind in the early days, and I thought, well, this is interesting. Let's see how this fits into this cryptozoology that I'm interested in. Just coming back onto your life in this now. How long have you been doing this for?
Well, the first time I came across these things was 1979.
Okay.
But when I became active in searching and finding things is 1986. It's been a long time.
That's a long time. I was 10 years old.
Yeah.
I was 10 years old. And obviously you're looking at dinosaurs and man coexisting in the past, but have you ever investigated stories of living dinosaurs that are supposedly around at the moment?
Oh, yeah, off and on. I've never gone searching for them, but for instance, pterosaurs in the Sierra Madre Occidental Mountains of Mexico, for instance. There's a possibility because some have been spotted there. And during specific storms, it seems that some of them have, been spotted after intense storms in the Big Bend area of Texas. Now, some of these places, you won't find hardly anybody lives there. So that's a possibility. And of course, I've had friends, some of them still my friends, like William Gibbons, searching from Aquila-Bibembe.
Oh, Bill Gibbons is a friend of yours. Yes,
yeah.
I like his work.
Yeah. And so I don't know. I did have the world's largest creation conference, but I haven't done it for a couple of years. It became harder and harder simply because People don't buy books anymore.
Mm.
I mean, as time goes, people don't watch even TVs that much. They used to sell a lot of books and materials, but
Yeah.
people are not as active in research and things, um, and far as really reading.
Yeah,
Material.
I do think that the attention span has dropped significantly.
Yeah,
Sure. I mean, somebody of my age in the early 40s, and just sort of sitting on the fence between those two generations in a way, and it's quite clear to see even 10, 15 years below me that the attention level has significantly dropped. At least the will to pay attention to something and find out what it means. Now, you mentioned Bill Gibbons, William Gibbons, Macaulay and Bemby, and there's lots of other dinosaur stories like that. Do you have an idea? I mean, these dinosaurs that are supposedly around in places like the Congo or, as they say, in the Sierra Madre, pterosaurs, uh, Diplodocus, perhaps stegosaurs. Some people have mentioned some sort of one-horned Triceratops or Styracosaurus. These types of things. The Burringer of Australia. I always think of that. And Rex and Heather Gilroy says some sort of Tyrannosaurus Rex. Do you think that these particular dinosaurs that are allegedly around, Nessie, etc., today, are they depicted in the things that you've seen? Are they the ones that are most often depicted, or they're
well, surprisingly, like in the Acambaro collection,
Mm.
there are definitely things that we would call that look like Bigfoot.
Oh
Um,
yes.
I don't know everything about Bigfoot. I do know that there was a guy, the Cryptozoological Society down in Arizona. I was there a number of years ago. In fact, I have every one of their journals here at my house.
Oh,
Um, but they had some hair samples that were unexplained. Um, and one time I spoke at, there was to be the Western Bigfoot Society of America,
uh-huh.
and they have a lot of castings. Um, and so I have some foot cast of some Bigfoot because I live here in a heavily forested area. Uh, in fact, you could go probably 20 miles from here, and the forest is so thick, you cannot even move through it. And
Wow.
there's some places you would be totally alone.
Oh,
And then
you're in Oregon, aren't you?
yeah, I'm in Oregon. Yeah,
Yes, 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 yes.
so there are guys that are out there doing it.
Mhm.
I've had them speak at the conference, but then after a while, I said, we got to have a good picture.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
After a while.
Okay. I mean, I
And
was
then there's some
recently.
people out of the conference that, that because I had Bill Gibbons, I think I had him
Mm,
3 times. There's some people who funded his Congo
mm,
expeditions.
mm.
But even the pygmies don't live in the deepest place.
No, I'm sure they live on the
Yeah,
peripheral edges of the
same
swamp where
as in
they can. Yeah,
same as in the Amazon. There's so many bugs, and
yeah.
I have huge bugs. I mean, I have like a scorpion. It's at least a foot long from
Right.
Indonesia in the jungle, and I have these bugs that are gigantic. And there is in parts of
Fossils
uh,
or
no living ones.
preserved? Oh, wow.
Oh yeah, they're living ones. In fact, I was just searching because for there is, and you've probably seen it. But I've been there since the jungle, the beginning of the Amazon in Peru,
Uh-huh.
and there is this place where there's a little village, less than 100 people. They're growing coffee there. But there
Wow.
was a guy going along a trail a few years ago, and he went off on the other areas exploring, and it came to little hills, and everything's covered by the forest, heavy
Yeah.
forest, butterflies everywhere, strange parrots that build these nests out of sticks, and they look like giant beehives.
Huh.
I thought it was some kind of beehives, but they're birds that build these nests.
Oh.
And he's going up there, and he came to an area. There's not more than maybe 30 of these pictographs, and one of them is a dinosaur with 8 guys surrounding him with spears and bows and arrows. So I went there. I've been there and went up there because one of the guys from the village took me in there with another guy who's a travel guy I've known for many years because of people down to Peru. So that'll also be in the book too.
That's fascinating. Talking about
In fact, it's in a little museum now. I mean, they don't have a problem. I mean, they're so poor. I wouldn't, by any standard, you'd say this is a museum, but it has a few items. They have a big mural painting
that's wonderful.
of an Indian doing the dinosaur and other stuff. And the archaeologists there, a few of them, they don't have any trouble accepting it. They put it about 5,000 years ago in their estimation, and there's no absolute way to date some of that stuff.
No, but that's what I thought really. And it's the same with so many things. You know, there has to be some sort of circumstantial evidence to find that date.
You can definitely tell if it was recent, though. You know, the colors and stuff.
Now, so just as a sort of a wrap up here for people that might be interested in investigating some of these things, what advice would you give to them if they want to find out more about the Ica Stones? Where can they go to find evidence online and pictures and things like that?
Well, you know, I have a book, the Ica Stones, and about dinosaurs and man living together. That's probably the most comprehensive thing definitely that's ever been written about the Ica Stones. Because I found that the people who try to dismiss it have never even gone and studied and photographed it. They will immediately say, well, yeah, but they don't look like dinosaurs. Or, for instance, the Mochis who did the stirrup pots with white and it was a kind of a reddish cream. All of them are that way, except they also painted on them. And people will say, oh yeah, well, it looks like a dinosaur, but it's got 2 heads. Well, most of them are like that, but not all of them. Also, they did monkeys with 2 heads. And if you understand the Mochi, well, we can tell about them. They believe that if an animal had great strength in his tail, like a monkey, see, hanging from limbs on it, and a dinosaur would have a lot of strength in his tail, they put a head at the end.
I see.
So,
I see.
But why would they do dinosaurs? But they also do monkeys that look normal. Well, and I mean, done a few dinosaurs that look normal.
Yeah.
So
and our cultures have historically represented things in a superstitious way as well.
In the same with creationists, like creationist.org or Answers in Genesis or Institute of Creation Research. It reminds me when I was in the Soviet Union, KGB. You know, anything that has, is it alphabet? AIG, KGB, ICR, CSM, it worries me. Yeah. And so they're very protective and they never went and studied it, but they're sure it's not true.
Yeah.
And they will point out, oh, look, there's a dinosaur. Well, he's not moving. His tail doesn't stick out when he's moving. And they bombard it that way. Or because we actually got an article published in the Creations Journal. You can go into creationism.org, and they put it there. But there was a firestorm. They came out against it. They came out against the people in Australia that allowed Dave and my article to be published. So they have some very, very interesting viewpoints. And I've shown them some stuff, and they just can't fathom that this is possible. Well, have you ever been to Peru? I said, have you ever been to Peru? Have you ever seen a tomb? Have you ever investigated fabrics? Then why are pre-Columbian authorities? There's another guy, Vance Nelson. He saw something on my website there's a vase that has a dinosaur. It's Paracas. That dinosaur was found about 2007. It has a very unusual eye socket. But you look at it. So he texted me, and I took him different places, and he's written a couple of books about dinosaurs and man. But then they bombard you with, oh, that can't be. That's just too good. Well, no.
We get the same thing all the time. The picture is either too good or it's too blurry. If it's too blurry, then it could be anything. If it's too good, then you must have faked it. And that's always the double standard. But I think the general view is that if minds are made up, they're very hard to change, regardless of what you show people, because these things are philosophical. And if your worldview is based upon something that is secure, you're asking a big ask from people. You're asking people to say, to accept that their worldview may not be the correct one. That takes a big change. So I don't. Whenever anybody objects, I say, well, that's fine. Have a think about this stuff. It's a big decision. I treat them like they're buying a house or something. This is a big ask. Go back and think about it. Look at the proposition again, and see what you think. Because I think if people are given wriggle room, sometimes they'll come around.
Yeah. Well, and this is all part of it. If the purple in the church, when they accept Christ, it takes theologians to mess stuff up. Because there's theologians who believe the Bible's inspired in spots, and they're inspired to spot the spots, and others are inspired to spot the spots they didn't spot. So they can tell you what's inspired and what's not. Well, it's not a spotty book. It's not a Dalmatian deity like a dog, a Dalmatian dog. It's spot on. And so the question is, when they begin to look at it, and you say, okay, but there's the complete erosion, and we're facing that so much in America.
Oh, I think so.
There's almost hardly any colleges or universities who believe that the scripture is really correct.
I mean, I'm in the UK, I would say next to none or none at all. So when I was in university, I studied theology and Hellenistic Greek. I initially had intended to become a pastor. I was very young. I was 24 when I decided not to do it. But at that time, we attended a Baptist school as well as I did a university course. So, it was all part and parcel of it. But you had to have your biblical school to run alongside the degree, and I think that's a good way to do it. But there were essentially no religious universities at all. I don't think we've really had anything like that for a very, very long time, apart from the Catholics. Maybe they've got their seminaries, but even they went to the university alongside us. Now I think it's it's a real pleasure to find out about everything that you've done. It seems like an exciting thing, and as you say, people who spend a long time searching into stuff, sooner or later in the future, when people pass on and other people come up, that information is lost. And I'm glad that you, at this still healthy and young age, are sharing what you have and letting us all know what you found out. I would advise anybody out there to get your book, Secrets of the Ica Stones and Nazca Lines, and that's available on Amazon. I've just put it on my wish list today, so I'll be reading that very soon. And Dennis, I'd just like to say thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you. God bless you, friend.
You too.
Thanks
God
for
bless
having
you.
me. Okay. Bye-bye.